brain simulation. What I mean by AGI is artificial general intelligence, which is a term that's being used by AI researchers more and more now. The idea is if you've got a car that can drive itself, that's artificial intelligence, or if you've got a machine that can beat a grandmaster at chess, that's artificial intelligence. But those two types of artificial intelligence couldn't do the other thing. So they're not general, they can't learn general sort of tasks like human beings can. I'm also going to talk a little bit about brain simulation at the end, but that's not as much as I'm going to talk about self-control and AGI. Okay, so why give this talk? The reason is that both AI and AGI are very popular topics of conversation amongst people who've got an interest in future technologies. And so I thought it would be an interesting thing to talk about for this group. However, in groups such as Humanity Plus or futurist groups or singularity type groups, the conversations about AI, in my opinion, or from what I've seen, seem to be dominated by people who've got an interest in technology and not necessarily people that know very much about biology and the human brain or psychology and sort of human mind, cognition and behaviour, which is a shame because we're the ones that study intelligence, so it sort of seems to be a bit of an odd disconnect to me. So just to tell you a little bit about me, I've got a background in physics and chemistry. I originally went to university to do chemistry when I was younger and then changed to physics. And then unfortunately I got very bad depression when I was younger, which meant I wasn't able to finish my physics degree. Now one of the things, the effect this had on me was twofold. One was to think to myself, I'm a fairly smart guy, what has gone wrong with my brain or my mind or my psychology that's had this massive impact on my life? So I wanted to understand it from that point of view. And also, the predominant paradigm back then, certainly, was this is a chemical imbalance, there are chemicals that are wrong in your brain, you need to be fixed. And to tell that to someone that's got a background in chemistry, it's like, I'm actually going to go and read up on that and see if what you're saying is true. So anyway, this began a lifelong interest in mine in the workings of the human brain and mind and how they interact, which led me on to reading some of the neuropsychopharmacology writings of David Pearce, who's talked here previously, and from that H+ community. Also, separate to that, I then went back to university as a mature student and got a psychology degree, and now I'm trying to finish my neuropsychology PhD. So I should probably be doing that instead of talking to you. Okay, so why interest in Humanity Plus? So Humanity Plus is, for those of you that don't know, is a futurist organisation, and it used to be the World Transhumanist Association, is that correct? So transhuman means being beyond human, and it's talking about where we might be in the future. And as a psychologist, that seems a bit funny to me because we don't really understand ourselves yet as we actually are. We don't understand humans, let alone humans plus. So how can we want to be transhuman when we don't actually really understand ourselves? Or for that matter, how can we create an artificial intelligence if we don't really understand what intelligence is yet? So then I thought about it and I thought, well actually if we did figure out all that stuff, then that would be beyond what anyone else has done, and that would be transhuman in of itself. If we fully understand the mind and the brain, that would be transhuman. Okay, just very briefly, just to let you know my position on all this singularity stuff. Accelerating change in terms of our culture and technology is something that is clearly happening and has been going on for some time. I think it is going to continue into the future for some time. And in principle, I think that an artificial intelligence or artificial general intelligence is something that we could make. However, I think it's a lot more complicated than a lot of people think. I think it might take us a lot longer, which is one of the things I'm going to talk about. However, I do reject that accelerating change is going to continue indefinitely and cause a singularity in the sense of continuing indefinitely. And I also reject that like superhuman AGI, which is denoting as AGI plus, is near. I don't think that's going to be happening anytime soon. And that's basically what my talk's about. However, I do accept that if we made a superhuman artificial intelligence, then the future would essentially be unpredictable. So that notion of there being an event horizon type singularity where you can't predict what's going to happen, I subscribe to that pretty fully. Okay, so just a quick overview of the talk. I'm just going to talk about what is neuropsychology and what it isn't. I'm going to do a quick overview of the human brain. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about methods and what they can teach us about the human brain and how it interacts with our psychology. And then I'm going to do the main body of talk, which is the neuropsychology of self-control. And then at the end I'm going to talk a bit about implications for AGI and a very little bit about brain simulation. Okay, so what is neuropsychology? It's not neuron-level neuroscience. So these people that will have a rat brain in a dish, or sometimes a slice of rat brain in a dish, and give it drugs to see what happens to various receptors, that's not what I do at all. That's fascinating stuff, but that's neuroscience. It's not computational neuroscience. So these people that build neural networks with nodes and connections and weights between those connections in order to model the human brain in some way, that's absolutely fascinating research, but that's computational neuroscience. That's not what I do either. The next one is that it's not cognitive neuroscience. All of these things you see in the media about we scanned this person's brain when they were looking at a carrot, and this part of their brain lit up, so that's the carrot centre. I'm joking, it's not that bad, but sometimes the media can report these things really terribly, okay? It's not cognitive neuroscience, so I do not scan people's brains. I'm not in any way involved in that. Okay, and the last one is, it's not brain surgery. I am not working with surgeons or neurologists, basically. That's the sort of thing that you're currently doing a placement in, is neurology. So those are the doctors that work with people that have had something go wrong with their brain or have suffered a brain injury. So what is neuropsychology? Neuropsychology is a study of acquired brain injury. So what this means is that we work with somebody that's had a brain injury, and according to which part of their brain has been injured, they can have very, very different sort of psychological and behavioural problems. And through working with them, it actually offers us another insight into the workings of the human mind or brain, or whatever you want to call it. So for example, this chap here, just got this from Google Images, but he's an Iraq veteran that was hit by a bomb blast and has suffered a brain injury from that. So people can get brain injuries from all sorts of different things like car crashes, strokes, violence, other kind of accidents, brain tumours, lack of oxygen. The list sort of goes on and on, but I've listed easily 95% of it there. So whilst I'm going to be talking about the human brain and how fascinating it is and everything that we've learned, one thing I should say is that what we learn in neuropsychology about the workings of the human brain and human psychology, we learn through working with sometimes very disabled people. So although I'm going to be perhaps talking quite excitedly about how fascinating this all is, I just wanted to preface it with the fact that we're doing this to try and help people that have suffered very bad disabilities in some cases. And just the respect that I've got for the people that I work with, just to let you know. Okay, so a quick overview of the human brain. There's actually slightly too much on this, it's a bit overwhelming. What we're looking at here is the left hemisphere of the human brain, and this area in green here is the occipital lobe, which is primarily involved in vision. It does do some other things as well, but there's your visual cortex, which is subdivided into lots of different areas. And that's a nice one for people to study because you can ask them questions about what they can see or what they can't see, or you can show them things whilst you scan their brain and see different areas light up. So it's quite a nice area, and the researchers that are involved in that area have got quite a lot of information. It's not what I do though. This blue area is the parietal lobe, which is to do with your sort of sensory awareness of your body in space, and to do with things like the reception of touch. Especially you've got the somatosensory cortex, which is a strip down there, which gives you feedback from all different parts of your body, like I'm holding a pen, I'm standing up, I'm stood here, that sort of thing. And the way that these two areas, the occipital lobe and the parietal lobe, work together is to give you a sense of visuospatial awareness. So I'm putting together my visual inputs of a room with my spatial ideas of the room, and it's sort of subconscious. You don't think about it, it's just sort of one sense in a way. Then in yellow we've got the temporal lobe, which is primarily to do with things like auditory cognition. So you've got the auditory cortex and areas that are critical for language, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about later on. This is a language area noted here. And then the next part is the frontal lobe, which is mainly what I'm going to be talking about today. The frontal lobe has got another couple of areas. Firstly, it's got the motor strip here, which is to do with sort of conscious and controlled actions, as opposed to sort of reactions which you might do without thinking about them. So sort of a flinch reaction or something like that isn't really handled by that part of the brain. But when you're learning a new skill or something, you have to take a lot of attention on what you're doing. And that is actually right next to the somatosensory cortex, which is all of your feedback on what you're doing. So it makes sense that those two parts of the brain are next to one another and can communicate a little bit. There's another part of the frontal lobe, is this area is called Broca's area, which I'm going to talk about a little bit more as well. And that's critical for speech as opposed to language. And as I say, I'll come back to these and make the distinction later on. I'm actually not going to be talking very much about these parts of the frontal lobe though, because the part that I'm primarily interested in, both for my PhD and this talk, is the prefrontal cortex, which is this area here. And this is to do with things like planning, self-control, some emotional self-control, and all the things I'm going to be talking about.
So,
yeah?
Is it the area you've got marked as language, is that also known as Wernicke's?
Yes, that is Wernicke's area.
And the Finch reactions, would that be in the cerebellum?
Yeah, a lot of like sort of unplanned and instinctive movements are in the cerebellum. The idea is that before the cortex and the rest of the brain evolved, more primitive creatures had the cerebellum, and so that was responsible for movement. But now this area basically sends commands to this area, which then sends the commands down the spine to move your arms and legs. So it's like this area is hierarchically superior in terms of giving orders, if that makes sense. And yes, you're right, it's Wernicke's area. So. Okay, so just some explanation of methods. One of the things that you'll see a lot in the media are these imaging studies where they will get somebody to do something, or they will show somebody something, get them to engage in a certain behaviour whilst they're in one of these magnetic resonance imaging scanners. And there are two types. There's structural, which is effectively like a sort of CT scan where you can see the brain. But then there's functional, which actually shows you activity of the brain. And actually what it's normally showing you is blood oxygenation levels. And from the amount of oxygen that is in the blood, you can infer the activity of the neurons, because the neurons require energy and have to respire in order to be active. So from the blood oxygen level, you can infer activity in the brain. And it is a pretty good measure. However, what it's showing you is that, in this case, these areas of the brain that are lit up are involved with or are associated with that behaviour. What this method does not show you in any way is that those areas cause that behaviour. Okay? They might cause that behaviour, but the method doesn't show you that. Okay? So I'll give you an example. There's this test called the Stroop Test, and I need a volunteer for this. Anyone fancy having a little quick neuropsychological test? Yeah? Okay. Could you just read the words as they say, just going down in columns, and just do it as quickly as you can? So,
blue, pink, grey, tan, green, red, black, white, yellow, orange, purple, brown.
Okay, now the next part of the Stroop Test, what I would like you to do is to read the colour of the ink that the word is printed in, but not the word itself. So again, just starting at the top one and going down in columns.
Red, blue, yellow, maroon, purple, brown, blue, green, red, black, red, orange, blue, green.
It's weird, isn't it? Because you'd think it should be really easy, okay, but it isn't. And the reason is that once you speak a language and you can read that language, you basically can't look at a word without reading it, because it's just so automatic. Your brain does it so quickly because it's so overlearned.
Yeah.
So when I ask people to do something different, like the Stroop Test is quite an old neuropsychological test, what you have to do is inhibit the automatic behaviour, which requires some concentration and self-control, which I'm going to be talking about.
Can I just say something?
Yeah.
We used to do this at school, and you cheat by only looking at the last letter.
Yeah, you could cheat by taking your glasses off and not reading it as well, if you had bad vision. Yeah. But anyway, the point about this is...
Can I,
yeah.
This is almost out of topic, but
Yeah.
I've done this,
Yeah.
and there is not that much of a difference when
Mhm.
it's on paper. Have you found that there's a difference when it's on screen? Because that was a big difference. Most of the time.
There tends to be a fairly big difference. I mean, this isn't one that I've administered like properly myself. This is a test which I'm aware of, but I haven't actually used with brain injured people to see. What you find is that people with frontal lobe difficulties actually can sometimes find it nearly impossible, or if they do find it possible, it's a lot slower. So anyway, the point that I'm making about this with regard to methods is, if I just go back a slide, Right, if you scan somebody's brain, and let's say you were new to neuroscience and you didn't know anything about what different parts of the brain did, you would see activity in the parts of the brain that were involved in inhibiting the automatic behaviour, but you'd also see activity in another part of the brain